right?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next session on this first day of commsHERO Week. Welcome, Marya. Have here. How are you, Marya?
I am very well, thank you, Lee. Looking forward to it.
Good. So just before you kick off, a quick introduction from my side. So Marya is an account director at Blink, which you'll notice is a sponsor of commsHERO Week. And I'm sure if you haven't already, click on the booths tab at the top of the screen, and Blink also have a booth in there where you can find out information about their mobile app, which is for frontline workers. So in this session, Marya is going to suggest looking at internal comms in a whole new way. I won't say what it's about because I don't want to ruin the content, but she will be sharing how some of their clients, such as the NHS and Stagecoach, have done this in order to have happier and more connected employees. So over to you, Marya, and I'll be back at the end to take any questions that the audience may have for you.
Thank you, Lee. Lee just did a great introduction for me there, so I'll dispense with I'm Marya Stevens, and this is what I do. As Lee said, I want to talk today about how we as internal communicators move from having just simple communications to more of a conversation. And we're going to look at this through the prism of building a community. Now, before I do that, I want to just introduce Blink in a bit more detail so you can understand, why I care about this and why I'm thinking about this. So Blink is a frontline engagement app that aims to make people happier and more effective in their work. A huge part of that is communications, but also technological enablement. Now, we help frontline organizations specifically, as Lee mentioned, right? The likes of NHS, Stagecoach, local government, companies, Domino's, a whole host of frontline organizations to drive sustainable and organic engagement by enabling not just two-way conversations, actually, but almost multi-directional conversations. And of course, in my work, that means that I speak to a lot of internal communicators who are having particular challenges, as I'm sure many of you will be aware of, and are really trying to drive forward a conversation within their orgs. So let me give you a little sneak peek at what we're talking about today. So I want to start by thinking about external communications, actually, and what we can learn from there. We'll touch a little bit on this idea of community management, what it means, how do we do it, and then we're going to get into that in a bit more detail. I want to give you some actionable tips and tricks to effectively create and sustain your community within your organizations. And of course, then we'll summarize and we'll have some space for questions at the end. And of course, you can ask them as we go throughout. Alrighty, so firstly, what can we learn from external communications? I think it's fair to say that there's been an evolution in external communications, right? But before we get there, let's look at a snapshot of some of the mediums and channels that external communicators use today. Now, that includes things like more traditional mediums, like the print media, or TV and radio for news and advertising, but also, things like the company report, annual report, white papers, one-pagers, all of that good stuff to communicate with an audience that for them is a little bit bigger than perhaps the audience for internal communicators. It's customers, consumers, but also the business's partners, suppliers, investors, potential investors, and also to some extent our employees, right? They're a part of that audience for external communicators too. Now, I spoke about an evolution. Enter social media. Now, this has really changed that environment in the past few years or maybe the past decade, right? The advent of social media. We define social media as, any form of electric communication. And often that's like social networking, apps, used to be sites, but now they're apps, microblogging, all of that kind of thing, which allows users to create online communities to share info, ideas, personal messages, and other content. Increasingly, you'll all know videos and photos are a huge part of that. Now, whilst we can debate about where it started, that's definitely a debate we had in the office when I was writing this. Some people say Usenet in the late 70s. Some people were staunchly voting for MySpace in 2004. I suppose it depends on when you came into the game. We can all agree that today, social media's presence is so ubiquitous as to be basically unavoidable for most of us. Right? That's changed the game for external communicators. It's provided a dynamic way for them to reach and engage that audience. And on the part of that audience, it's totally changed their expectations. Now, it's worth saying that usage of social media for external comms, corporate comms, is undoubtedly more prevalent for, kind of consumer and retail focused orgs. But it's now also common for even like the FTSE 100, right, to communicate their earnings, company updates and the like via Twitter or LinkedIn. Regardless of all of that, organizations of any size, industry or reach are now compelled to employ these social sharing platforms to inform and educate their audiences in a way that they didn't really need to before. And for that audience, that's an expectation, right? They want that dynamic, real-time updating of information. They want that view inside of the company, and they want the ability to engage with that. And that's where this sense of community comes from for external communicators. But let's look at the other side of that. Internal comms. Now, I noted that for external communicators, employees are arguably a part of that social media audience for them. But for the most part, the ways that that external communicator can engage with them, the things that social media brings for them, they're not really present in the standard playing field for internal communicators. Right now, for internal communicators, we've definitely still got more traditional formats like print still in play. Especially for us at Blink, working with frontline organizations, we'll always hear about things like the monthly or quarterly magazine going out to canteens and staff rooms, posters on the notice board, or even, good old-fashioned word of mouth. Cascade of information via line or middle management is still super prevalent. We've also got email, of course, and most organizations will have some form of intranet. But overall, though, across each of those pieces, there's a bit of a theme, right? For the most part, these are all very top-down, static means of communicating. And that has an impact, and perhaps not the impact that we'd like. So we could all agree, I hope, that the purpose of internal communicators is to provision information to employees, the information that they need, and also to help build a sense of connection and community. Right? Why? Because when employees are well informed, they're better engaged with the business, and that leads to all kinds of positive business outcomes, as well as just happier employees. Now, all of the latest studies show, and especially so in the past couple of years, it's been a crazy couple of years for everyone around the world, and employees just aren't as informed as they should be. And furthermore, or even consequently, they're not engaged, right? I don't want to bore you with stats that you've all probably read, but the most recent Gallup State of the Workplace report shows that 75% of employees feel like they're missing out on the company info that they need. And 21% of the global workforce, only 21% feels engaged. And that actually drops to 19% when we're looking at Europe specifically, and even lower when we're looking at the UK. Now, that means that those orgs are missing out on the improvements in retention, productivity, and profitability that highly engaged workforces are driving. So if we want internal comms to have a real impact, to do what it says on the tin, to inform people and push up that employee engagement, there's a few things we need to do. We need to build a community that allows our employees to share ideas and opinions, to link their values and goals to those of the organization, and to foster relationships based on meaning and worth. All right, so let's get into it. What is community management and how do we enable this? Now, it's not that I want to spend my time today telling you to use social media at work, start whipping out Facebook, when you're on the job. That's not what I'm saying. But rather, I want to focus on what social media-like tools and that environment makes possible, And that is the ability to create and sustain a sense of community within the workplace, right? The mechanisms that our external communicators use to talk to the public when we're thinking about social media, it's the ability to easily post out content into a feed, right? To allow for comments and reactions. No longer just likes, but loves and supports and insightfuls if you're using LinkedIn. It also often includes the ability to directly engage with that audience, on an individual basis in private chats, DMs, and the like. And it gives us a subsequent bucket of analytics that allow us to learn what makes that community tick. All of this leads to hyper engagement, and it leads to that sense of community. Now, before we get into those tips and tricks, why do we care about this at Blink? Look, as I said, we've got a specific focus on the front line. So it's particularly important for us to think about this community aspect, because for many of these organizations, there's a large majority of their employees who are dispersed from the mothership, right? They're completely disconnected from their peers, from the company, and from the mission. Now, organizations that are using Blink have found that this approach, right, that focuses on building community, on fostering openness and welcoming feedback, it's allowed them to bridge the gap between those frontline workers who are scattered across geographies, business units, departments, and the like, and the executives or the desk-based workers, because there's always a portion of those in any frontline org, who sit in head office. So before I start getting into those tips, I want to just give you a little sneak peek from one of our customers. So this is a little story, just a quick vid from our customer, Alara Caring. Alara is a 35,000 person strong home health organization in the US. That means they've got around 32,000 nurses, home health aides, and their coordinators who are out in the field, right? They'll spend their day going into the homes of vulnerable or elderly people who need a little bit of help. An individual home health worker at Alara could do 7 to 10 jobs a day, right? They're going in someone's home, they're out on the bus or driving to their next place, and they're alone, right? They're alone in their workday, but there's no kind of sense of wider connection to Alara as a business and all of their colleagues who are out doing a similar thing to them on a day-to-day basis. They just don't have that feeling. Now, we've been working with them for 10 months now, and just quickly listen to what they say about the change that Blink has made.
What we're finding is communities that are forming within the community. So workers are able to connect with other workers in ways that they had never done before. They're finding people that they work with common ideas, common skill sets, common likes and dislikes, and it's helping the organization come together as one. And it's really impacting the lives of our employees in ways that we hadn't anticipated it to do so.
So that was, so glad that video played smoothly there, folks. That was Kyle Sita, the CIO at Alara. And there's just something I want to grab onto there that he said. It's helping the organization come together as one. And that is what a community is, right? A flourishing community brings that sense of being part of something bigger than yourselves. But also just to note that last point he made, it's having an impact on employees' lives in ways they couldn't have anticipated. And that's wonderful. But what we've also seen with Alara in the past 9 months is that impact that it's having on employees is having a further impact downstream. It means that their end users, their customers are getting a better standard of care. It means that their home health workers are staying with the business longer. They're relying on agencies less. All of those kind of positive business impacts that I spoke about, this is possible when you've got an engaged community. So let's get into it. Okay, I said this is where I want to spend most of my time here today talking with you. How do you do this? How can you make this happen within your organizations? There's a few things to note. Now, firstly, I want to start with the tool, the delivery mechanism, right? We noted at the top that, some of the common mechanisms that internal communicators use today, they're too top down, they're static. Right? If we're trying to deliver a kind of social media-like experience that allows people to engage in a similar way, those tools, they're not really going to cut it. Key to having the right tool is in providing a user experience that people are used to and comfortable with. So for us at Blink, we've adapted that social media form factor, that feed experience, and brought a really familiar user experience to our frontline workers. Now, for frontline workers in particular, they're not behind a desk. So a mobile experience is not just powerful for them, it's kind of bare minimum, it's table stakes. It needs to be a mobile experience. But that's also true of us as desk-based workers. Of course, there's plenty of platforms that we use in our workday, and having mobile access to them, good mobile access to them, helps to drive adoption, helps us to be more effective. And, also, if I'm accessing the company community, as it were, on my phone, I'm likely to engage with it in a very similar way to how I engage with those other community social sharing platforms in my personal life. Okay, now there's also a reason why social media platforms are so engaging, right? They're super intuitive. They're cleverly designed by clever people in Silicon Valley or wherever to tap into the ways that our minds and attention spans work today. And you've all been there, you're locked into a scroll and you keep pulling the screen down so it pings up and refreshes. Having that experience, it drives the engagement. But there's another part of that, and it's to do with the content, right? The content that we consume on these kind of social media-like apps. It's bite-sized, and it's really easy for me to digest. So if we want to create this community, we need to make sure that the communications we're putting out are optimized for the device or the medium that our audience is going to read it through. If I'm on my mobile, I don't want to scroll through lengthy PDFs or slide decks. I just want to be updated quickly and easily. We also need to make sure that that conversation that we're having is tailored and relevant to all those different parts of our audience. Now, there'll always be, company-wide, more corporate communications that are relevant to everyone. But as me as an individual, of a particular role in a particular department, there are just going to be messages or conversations that I more want to be a part of. They're more important to me. And for a frontliner, that means, I've got a minute, I'll step outside of the bus cab or I'm in between patients. I've got a minute to look at my phone. I can quickly see, what's being served to me is what I need. It's what's relevant to me. It means I can access it, I can look at it, I can engage with it, I can go back to getting work done. As an internal communicator, you need to have a tool that allows you to define that audience, target them accurately, really use that feed intelligently. Just in the same way to, how TikTok magically knows to serve you like 100 videos that just keep you locked in. We need to bring that element to our tool. It means that user experience is more seamless and more engaging for our audience. Now, a key part of any community is the ability for that multi-directional dialogue and feedback, right? Beyond the annual company survey, a thriving community is going to allow us to tap into the ideas and opinions of our employees in real time. Now, that's super powerful for internal communicators, right? Because firstly, it allows us to feed that wealth of info into the messaging that we're putting out. But also it gives us insight into how our strategies, our goals and values as a company, the mission, how do they align with our community of employees, right? Are we walking the talk? With the right tool, imagine a world where instead of just asking your exec team or your SLT a question about, how you might innovate in your industry or, what are the right company values at this moment in time for this change in the strategic direction or whatever it might be. Instead, you can pose that question to all of your employees or ask a particular department that you might not otherwise have pulled into that conversation. Now that can start to produce some new and wonderful ideas, really juicy stuff. Right, our employees do have great ideas and they've got great opinions, but unless we provide space for that dialogue, that gold mine is just going completely untapped. Right, it's lost. We're not even using it, and we can't have that. We've got a community, we bring that stuff to the fore. Now, there's another piece to that. We spoke about ideas, opinions. What about stories? For external communicators and marketeers in particular, on social media, the authentic content that's coming there, right, from the audience, it's super powerful for them as advertising. And that's no different when we think about the internal sphere, right? The content that your employees can give you, and you give them the ability, is the best employee branding you could ask for. And when those stories bubble up from your workforce and you see that they align with your values and your goals as a company, you know then that you've got some of the best advocates for the business that you could possibly have. Now, when it comes to the frontline especially, they are, of course, the ones who are closest to your customers, your end users, or your product, right? When they're given the freedom to shout about the work that they're doing or the communities that they serve, like those folks at Alara, they can congratulate their peers or their management or even the company at large. They feel seen, they feel heard, and they keep the conversation going for you. Now, going from being a top-down, static communicating organization, using those tools that we touched on at the top, to what I'm talking about here, right? Putting the power in your employees' hands to tell their own stories. That is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's a journey that eventually pays dividends. So within Blink, for example, our internal communicators or admins, they can easily surface up that user-generated content and begin to curate those stories. Now, just in terms of efficiency, that's a huge thing for internal communicators. Right? Today, internal communicators might be going out trying to find those stories, really digging for gold, talking to managers, trying to get that, hear about what your workforce are doing. Now, with the right tool, we can put that in your hands. And so you can start to curate rather than constantly creating content from a blank slate. You find those stories, you put a spotlight on them, you expand the audience, you bring that to the attention of the whole business, make sure it's getting the engagement that it deserves. The flip side of that, of course, is that, your employees, they tell their stories, they see you putting it on blast, as it were, and they know that they're getting that appreciation, right? They're being raised above the parapet. They're seen as contributors to the business. And again, that's an important thing for making that community work. I'm going to sip my water. Promoting inclusion. Any decent community is an inclusive one, okay? Now, with all workforces, there are groups who are aligned over, just even interest or hobbies and goals, but importantly, over facets of their identity, right? Whether that's their sexuality or their race, their religion, all of these are good stuff there. Now, especially for our workers who are dispersed, right? They might, like as with Alara, they're spending a lot of time alone. They're not necessarily there in head office. Finding that tribe within the community can be difficult. And in this case, and this is very true for frontline orgs, they might then rely on tools that are outside of your remit as internal communicators, like a WhatsApp or private Facebook groups. And that's not what we want. Now, in recent years as well, we've seen organizations quite rightly prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion. And an important part of that journey is establishing and supporting those buckets of people within your organization, as employee resource groups who can help you drive that agenda forward. Now, the right tool will provide you with a safe and secure environment for these important topics to be discussed. Now, ERGs help to expand and reframe outdated attitudes in the workplace. Right? And when we allow that to happen, we're allowing employees to come into work, show up as themselves, and begin creating workplace relationships that have real meaning to them. Now, as internal communicators, though, the work doesn't stop there, right? ERGs work both within and outside of their respective groups to drive that change in an organization, to help drive that change in an organization. And IC stakeholders have got a vital role to play in ensuring that those DE&I principles and the contributions of ERGs are part of the corporate storytelling. We need to raise up those voices in that work and make sure it's being shared amongst the broader community. And of course, as I've said, when people begin building those relationships with one another, they begin building that emotional relationship with the larger organization. They see that the organization walks the talk, and that community becomes one that they want to be a part of. Really, really important stuff there. Now, one of my funniest slides, just have a little fun. Okay, like the fact that this space, this community that we're building is professional and it's, it's at work, doesn't mean it has to be synonymous with being mundane or stiff or dry, right? When we think about a community, when we think about being amongst people that we connect with, that we like, that we want to spend time with, we know that we also want to laugh together, right? It helps to strengthen those bonds. It allows people to relax a little bit, let their hair down, let go of their worries, and avoid some of the burnout and the stress, actually, that we've all felt at work in the past few years. You're probably thinking, why have you got a photo of a dog there? But it's funny. I liked it. He's wearing glasses and he's reading a magazine about other dogs. And I thought of this photo because I was thinking about ways that the right tool can support you in just having a little bit of fun, right? When we think about that tool, it's going to have lots of ways that enable that. And, my thinking here was, and we see this actually, we see things quite similar to this on Blink all the time, right? Share your cutest, funniest dog photo. Or you might be doing a kind of you've been framed style call out to your employees. Like, share your videos of you falling over, all within health and safety guidelines, of course. There are loads of ways that we can laugh together, and you'll know what works for your organization. The point here is just to ensure that you welcome that within your community. Just like the piece on inclusion, making a safe space for people to be vulnerable, for people to just, let their hair down a little bit, it's going to really help you drive that community to the next level. And a final point here, I suppose, is just bringing it to life in person. I know through these tips and tricks that I've shared with you, I've been talking about a tool, right? I've been talking about the right communications tool that allows you to build that community. But we have to remember that a community isn't purely virtual. And this is, this can be particularly difficult for frontline organizations that I work with. They don't necessarily come together IRL as much as desk-based orgs might do. But we still must encourage it, right? Whether it's after work drinks or an annual employee barbecue, whatever it might be, bringing that community together in person helps cement it, right? It helps to make it something real that people are a part of. And now my final point. We need to be able to check the pulse of our community, right? We need to make sure it's healthy. Like a doctor, I didn't want to go with this analogy, but it's just come out. We need to be able to diagnose any illnesses or problems. The right tool will give you that analytics. It will give you that behavioral data, and that will come in the form of explicit and implicit data, right? Just like with social media, you should be getting a real-time understanding of how people are engaging, how much they're liking, how long they're reading for, dwell time and views, and how much they're commenting, what percentage of them are actively engaged. The list goes on and on and on. By looking at those things, right, how many active users this week, top trending posts, the composition of those posts, whether it's videos or photos or text, it will be videos and photos, it always is. That will allow you to learn what really gets folks' attention. And in terms of the messaging, the conversation that you're having with the community, you can start to feed that understanding into your future output. But you go a little bit further than that, right? Because when we have that data, those kind of data points that are similar to what we get to social media, we can start to tie that with employee satisfaction. We can start to learn more about why staff are turning over, why they perhaps aren't staying with the org, or some of the challenges that they're having with the role or their management or whatever it might be. With a flourishing community, you can really go that little bit deeper, right? Instead of just looking at how much they're commenting, you can start to see, well, what are they commenting on? What are they commenting? What are they actually saying in the comments? What are they posting? When you give people the keys to the kingdom and you actually allow them to start telling those stories, as we touched on, well, what are they talking about? Right? We start to see what makes them tick. Do they believe in the mission? Are they aligned? What challenges are they having? What are they pleased about? What are they scared about? What do they feel confident about? Right? We really start to get to the heart of the matter. Right? We start to hear their inner voice. And this giant conversation in our wonderful community that we've built is ongoing, right? And those insights that you can glean from it, they're there in real time. They're there for you always. And as internal communicators, you need to tap into that to really be intelligent about the way you continue to engage your community. All righty, some tips and tricks there. Let me summarize them for you. I said it at the top, user experience is critical, right? We have got such high expectations today. We've got high expectations of all of the technology that we use, and social media has had a huge part in pushing those expectations up. Sometimes when I go into an app, like on my phone that, like not for work, like I use in my personal life, and it doesn't load quite quick enough. And I mean, this is milliseconds now. It needs to load in milliseconds. Or if one of the things that really annoys me is when the message doesn't fit on the screen, and I have to go in and turn my iPhone to allow it to go this way. And yeah, I'm out of there. I'm already annoyed. I'm not going to use that anymore. That is not what you want as internal communicators. We've got to give our community the best possible experience, right? So they can uncover the information that they need. They can stay informed. They can connect with the parts of the community that they need to connect with. Right? They can be more efficient in their jobs. They can be happier at their work, and they can be more engaged. Can't stress this one enough as well. Putting the power in your employees' hands to actually speak up, right? Providing them a safe environment for them to talk about their work and what they love and what's challenging for them. It's going to give you that sweet employee branding. It's also going to allow you to understand them, right? It's going to allow you to understand what makes them tick, really get them stories from the workforce. Now, building an inclusive community means building a community that every employee wants to be a part of. Creating conversation, encouraging openness, fostering that connection allows people to feel safe and supported in showing up to work as their whole selves. Right? And it allows them to build better connection with their peers and the company. And it also drives forward important strategic objectives for the company itself. And, having a little fun. There's always time for us to have a little bit of fun together. And I think that, when you're enabling that sense of community, the same as with this inclusion piece, you start creating room for people to just let loose a little bit. And that allows them to be happier in their work too. And with the behavior analytics, it's true of all the previous points, right? Just digging into the behavior behind every single thing that you see within the community. Understand how it works, what makes it tick, who they care about, who's worried, happy, or angry, and about what. Allowing you to spot the challenges, the successes, anything that needs to be brought to your attention, all of that good stuff. Whilst also driving the way that you frame the messaging to your community, allowing you to keep your community healthy and flourishing. Now, the point of all of this is to say that when we make space for a community, we really move from static communications, sort of top-down, just not as engaging communications, to a dynamic and enriching environment of conversation that everyone can be a part of. And that makes a huge difference to the business. Now, try to make that as unsalesy as possible. But of course, you will have seen some screenshots of Blink in there, and I spoke about Blink throughout. This is something that we enable, right? It's 100% what we believe in, opening up a conversation and building a community. And that's the communications app that we provide. And I will be around if you want to talk in more detail about that. But for now, I just wanted to quickly go back to Lee or Dom for any questions.
Hello, Marya.
Hello.
So I'm conscious that it's now 10:02, so I'm going to run over by 5 minutes because you've got a lot of questions that have come in. So I would just going to jump straight into the questions here. So we've got a question from Dylan Lambert, who's a consultant at Work Networks. And he has asked, how do you bring people on board that aren't on social media in their personal lives? The people that just don't like it or don't understand it.
No, it's a great question, Dylan. And I'm sure you can imagine as well, with a lot of these industries that we serve, in the front line in particular, we've got some interesting demographics in those kind of organizations. Definitely, one of the first things that those frontline workers might say to you is, well, I don't use Facebook or, this kind of thing. There's another part of that. When I'm speaking from Blink's perspective, we drive utility. Today we're really looking at that communication piece, that community building piece, but a huge part of Blink is technological enablement. right? So within our app, we will give a frontline worker access to their payslips. That's a huge driver. The first thing that pulls them in, but also the ability to book their holidays. They don't have to go to their manager for it anymore. They can just do it themselves. It's also a sector where you'll still see a lot of manual or paper-based processes. So we digitize all of that. And it means, for a bus driver, for example, instead of having to go back to the depot at the end of the day and find a form, fill it in triplicate about a near miss incident he had, he can do it on his phone. He gets home on time. So we really believe, if you want to create a community, using one of these kind of employee apps, it's got to be something more that's in it for that workforce. And for us, it comes with that digital enablement.
Great. So I'm just going to jump down a question. I'll come back to Emma's question in a moment because this one kind of links. So we've got a question from Alex Harvey, Senior Employee Communications Advisor at QBEEO. And he's asked, how have you overcome issues with employees not wanting to use their own personal device or data? Obviously, in a perfect world, we'd be able to issue a work device to everybody, but it's not always possible.
Yeah, no, it's a great one again. Thank you, Alex. And it's a very similar answer. I would say probably 80% of users who have Blink use it on their personal phones. And you wouldn't be able to ask them that it's a quid pro quo, right? We want them there so we can get them in the feed, we can engage them in this community. And that does a lot of the work, but to get them there in the first place, to get them to use their data, absolutely, we've got to put something in it for them. There are some countries around the world as well where we work where the data thing is much more of a challenge, and then it becomes a technical thing. Like we cache things offline so that the data usage isn't heavier. Much less interesting portion of the answer there, but it's also quite important.
Great. So jumping back to the question from Emma Elston, PR and Marketing at North Devon Homes. Emma has asked, how would you bring teams along who don't see the importance of business comms in the day-to-day and just want to get on with their job? Obviously, you mentioned a few ideas in terms of bringing fun to it, etc. But what would you recommend as an overall?
I think the biggest thing that we see here is the split of the content, because, and this is super important, right? Of course, there are corporate communications that need to be put out. But, and this is really true for our frontline workers, they don't start off being massively connected with that. So in our app, we generally see the split to more localized content, like maybe coming from my direct line manager. It's got to be about 80% in his favor or her favor, right? So really, the way that Blink works is that everything is nicely tailored to me. But I'm going to engage much more if I'm hearing from my manager or my peer on that feed than if it's constant kind of company updates or the annual report, et cetera, et cetera. The kind of connection that the frontline worker can build with those kind of stories from a more kind of corporate slant, it comes over time. And it only comes when they've got comfortable with engaging in the feed with, stories that to them are initially much more relevant. So you've really got to start with that localized content.
Great. And then I've got one final question and then a comment that I'll finish on. Final question is from Sarah Firth, who is Communications Officer at Leeds and York Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. Sarah has asked, how do clients mandate and manage mobile phone usage in certain frontline roles, such as on wards?
Yeah, it's another great question. And, to Sarah, we work with the NHS up in 10,000 of their users, and we rolled out to them during the pandemic, actually, in about 48 hours, rolled out to 10,000 users, and how people were using it and engaging with it was super important. If you imagine a lot of the frontline industries that we work with, you've got, people in a manufactory, bus drivers in the cab. Obviously, they can't use their phones at that time. Our teams, when we're rolling out Blink, will work with the project team client side to make sure we're putting guidelines in place for this. It's not so much, most companies will already have a social media policy or a using your phones policy. It's about dovetailing into that. It's an education piece. Of course, I don't even remember being at school. You weren't allowed phones there, but sometimes you might have had one. You can't, it's very difficult to truly police that. But if we educate people properly, we should expect them to use it in the right way and not have their phones on the wards.
Great. And then final comment that I will finish on from my side is from Gethin Evans, who's marketing communication lead at Cheltenham Borough Council. And his comment is towards how apt it is that on World Mental Health Day, we're reminded about the importance of being a community and engaged employees who might otherwise be totally isolated from the mothership or the rest of the organization. So it's great how obviously social media, apps such as Blink, etc., can bring everyone together as a community, no matter where you are based in your organization.
Yeah, thank you, Gethin. Great point.
Great. So I've just seen a note in the chat from Dan at Blink. He'll be sitting on Blink's table when this session ends. So go along for a virtual coffee, or if you're curious around Blink, I'm sure Marya will join there as well if any of you have any further questions that we haven't got around to answering. But first and foremost, thank you so much, Marya, for being here today and for presenting. It's a great session, lots of great content that you see has resonated with the audience so far. And then once again, thank you to Blink as a whole for sponsoring commsHERO Week.
Thank you, Lee.
Great, not to worry. And then just for everybody, we have run over slightly, but we will be going live at 3:00 on the dot with Carrie-Anne and Lee for their Take the Lead live podcast session. So grab yourself a cup of tea and join us back in 4 minutes' time. Thank you.